Welcome to the Good Book Tales. Tonight, I'm going to take you on a journey through one of the most mysterious, most debated topics in all of human history, the end times. But not the version you've heard in Sunday sermons or late-night documentaries. What you're about to hear are the end times secrets no one preaches, the ones hidden in plain sight, whispered about, but rarely spoken aloud. Imagine waking up one morning to find the world quietly shifting, not with explosions or chaos, but with silence. The kind of silence that feels alive. Governments confused, scientists speechless, people sensing something in the air that words can't explain. It starts slowly, almost unnoticed. Skies that glow strangely at night, a hum beneath the earth, dreams that feel too real to be dreams. And among all this uncertainty, a few people begin to connect the dots. One of them is Daniel Reyes, a journalist who doesn't believe in prophecy, until he finds a letter hidden inside an old Bible that once belonged to his late grandfather. The letter speaks of a timeline of the unseen, a countdown that aligns with global events unfolding today. It warns that when the last silence breaks, the truth will no longer hide. Daniel laughs it off at first, but the more he investigates, the more the world around him starts to echo the words of that letter. There's also Mara, a theology professor who once walked away from faith after witnessing too much pain. But when her students begin reporting strange visions, all connected to the same passage of scripture, one that no one seems to remember reading before, she starts to question everything she thought she knew. This isn't a story about destruction, it's a story about revelation, the kind that doesn't just shake nations but hearts. As Daniel and Mara's paths cross, they uncover something ancient and unsettling. Symbols that appear across continents, the same. Message encoded in different holy texts, and a shadowy network that's been guarding this secret for centuries. And the deeper they dig, the clearer it becomes. The real end times aren't about the end of the world, but the unveiling of truth. Truth that challenges what we believe about time, reality, and faith itself. So before you scroll away, pause for a moment. Look around you. Have you noticed how the world feels different lately? The growing tension, the signs, the division, the strange unity forming in silence? Maybe these aren't random. Maybe we're closer to something than anyone dares to admit. Stay until the end of this video, because once you hear what Daniel and Mara uncover, once you understand the signs hidden in the very rhythm of our days, you'll never look at the news, the sky, or your own reflection the same way again. And remember, the scariest part about prophecy isn't that it might be false, it's that it might already be happening. Daniel couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching him. The letter lay open on his desk, its edges worn, the ink faded but clear enough to read. The handwriting was his grandfather's, steady, deliberate, like every word was chosen with care. It mentioned a cycle repeating since the dawn of man, and warned of a hidden pattern linking the rise and fall of civilizations. Daniel tried to reason with himself. Maybe it was just his mind finding meaning where there was none. But the timing bothered him. Earthquakes had struck 3 countries that same week, all within the same hour. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. He started tracing the letter's clues, cross-referencing old newspaper archives and government records. Each line seemed to lead him to another dead end, but one phrase kept coming back: the watchers of the turning sky. He typed it into a search engine, and the results were few but strange. Ancient scrolls, forgotten prophecies, even a recently declassified document from the 1970s mentioning unexplained global phenomena connected to solar activity. The deeper Daniel went, the more it felt like the world had been hiding something right in front of everyone's eyes. Meanwhile, across town, Mara sat alone in her lecture hall after class, staring at the whiteboard. The verse her student had written earlier, one she didn't recognize, still glowed faintly in the fading light. She checked every Bible translation she could find, but none contained those words. Her mind raced, wondering if someone had played a prank. But the handwriting belonged to a student who swore they didn't remember writing it. The verse spoke of a veil that shall lift when the 7th silence breaks. Mara didn't understand it, but somehow, it felt personal. That night, she dreamed of the same verse, carved in stone, surrounded by shadowy figures chanting in a language she didn't know but somehow understood. When she woke, the words echoed in her mind like an old memory returning to life. She tried to dismiss it, but something inside her whispered that she couldn't. Both Daniel and Mara found themselves drawn by a force they couldn't name, their paths slowly weaving toward one another. Across the world, news anchors spoke of strange alignments in the night sky. Power grids flickered without cause. Clocks in different cities stopped at the exact same second, 11:11. And somewhere deep beneath the noise of the world, the first silence had already begun to break. Daniel's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It contained only coordinates and a single line. Asterisk, if you want to know the truth, come alone. Asterisk, he hesitated, staring at the glowing screen in the dark. The coordinates pointed to an abandoned observatory just outside the city, a place his grandfather used to visit before he died. He tried to convince himself it was just a hoax, maybe a trick by someone who knew about his research. But curiosity won. Something deep inside urged him to go. Like the letter itself was pulling him forward. Mara, on the other hand, couldn't focus. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of light and faces she didn't recognize. Her colleagues thought she was overworked, but she felt it was more than exhaustion. Late one evening, while reviewing an old manuscript from the university archives, she found an illustration of the same verse she'd seen in her dream. Only this version showed the veil as a circle of light hovering above a crowd. Beneath it, a phrase read, asterisk, those who see it shall remember what was forgotten. Asterisk. While Daniel drove through the winding forest road toward the observatory, he noticed the air growing still. His car radio crackled, then filled with static, followed by a voice whispering faintly through the noise. His grandfather's voice, saying his name. His hands trembled on the wheel. At the same moment, Mara received an email from an anonymous sender containing a single image. A satellite photo showing a glowing ring of light over the same coordinates Daniel was driving toward. Neither of them knew it yet, but their search for answers had already crossed into something much larger than prophecy or science. And as midnight drew near, the world itself seemed to be holding its breath. Daniel reached the observatory just as the clock struck midnight. The sky above was darker than usual, almost too still, as if the stars themselves were waiting. The air buzzed faintly, a low hum that seemed to rise from the ground. The old building stood silent, its rusted dome cracked open like a watchful eye. Daniel stepped inside, flashlight trembling in his hand. Dust swirled in the beam, and the scent of old metal and rain filled the air. On the floor lay a circle of symbols, the same ones he had seen in his grandfather's letter. As he crouched to get a closer look, the lights flickered. His phone vibrated again, another message. Asterisk, it begins when the silence breaks. Asterisk before he could respond, the ground shuddered softly beneath him. He turned toward the telescope at the center of the room, where faint light shimmered from the lens. Through it, the night sky glowed with strange patterns, constellations shifting, stars moving into shapes that shouldn't exist. Miles away, Mara sat in her office, staring at the same coordinates on her screen. The ring of light she'd seen earlier now pulsed like a heartbeat. Her phone rang, the caller ID unknown. She hesitated, then answered. A calm voice spoke, "He's found it." Before she could ask who it was, the line went dead, and the lights in her office blinked out. At the observatory, Daniel heard footsteps echoing behind him, slow, deliberate, approaching from the shadows. His flashlight flickered, and for a split second, he thought he saw a figure standing by the door. Outside, the hum grew louder, spreading across the sky. Somewhere between time and silence, something ancient was awakening, and neither Daniel nor Mara was ready for what came next. Daniel froze, the sound of footsteps echoing in the hollow observatory. He called out, his voice shaky, "Who's there?" Only silence answered. Then a faint click, the sound of an old projector coming to life behind him. On the cracked wall, images flickered, newspaper headlines from decades ago, maps marked with red circles, and finally, a photograph of his grandfather standing beside a group of strangers. Across the bottom, a single phrase was typed, asterisk, the circle of silence. Asterisk. Daniel stared, trying to process it. His grandfather had been part of something. Maybe even the same secret network he'd been chasing without realizing it. The next image flashed, a symbol that matched the ones on the floor. It wasn't just a mark, it was a map. His pulse quickened as the projector whirred louder. Suddenly, a metallic voice spoke through the static. You were never supposed to find this." He turned sharply, the flashlight shaking in his hand. The figure he'd glimpsed earlier stepped forward, an older man, his face half hidden beneath a hood. "You're repeating his steps," the stranger said. "Your grandfather tried to reveal what's coming, but he stopped before it was too late. You still can." Daniel wanted to ask what that meant, but before he could, the lights from outside cut through the windows, a blinding ring of white circling the observatory like a halo. At that same moment, Mara's computer powered back on by itself. A live feed appeared, Daniel standing inside the glowing ring. She gasped, realizing the pattern around him wasn't just light. It was a coded symbol that matched ancient records she'd been studying. The text beneath the video read, "Asterisk, the alignment has begun." Asterisk. Outside, across the world, reports of strange phenomena began flooding the news. Unexplained vibrations, skies glowing red at midnight, and a sound like a heartbeat resonating through the earth. Mara grabbed her coat and rushed toward her car, dialing Daniel's number. It rang once before cutting off, replaced by the same static voice whispering, "The second silence has fallen." Her hands trembled on the wheel as she started the engine, realizing the first event was only the beginning, and that whatever Daniel had found might not just reveal the truth about the end times, but change how humanity understood its very existence. Mara reached the observatory just before dawn. The horizon glowed faintly, a strange mix of silver and orange light, as if the sun was struggling to rise through something unseen. She ran up the old stone steps, calling Daniel's name. Inside, the air shimmered with heat though the night had been cold. The glowing ring still pulsed around the floor, its light now slower, steadier, almost like it was breathing. Daniel stood in the center, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, where symbols danced across. The dome in a pattern neither of them could understand. "Mara," he said softly without turning. "It's not what we thought." His voice sounded distant, almost hollow. She stepped closer, afraid to cross the ring. "What do you mean?" she asked. He pointed upward. The stars projected through the cracks of the observatory formed a perfect alignment, the same constellation that had appeared in his grandfather's notes. "It's not about the end," Daniel whispered. "It's about remembering." The ground trembled beneath them, and suddenly, the air filled with a low hum. The symbols on the floor began to fade, replaced by faint outlines of people, shadows, or maybe memories. They weren't frightening, just familiar. Mara gasped as one of them stepped forward. It was Daniel's grandfather, looking exactly as he had in the old photo. "You've opened what we sealed," the vision said. "Not to destroy, but to awaken." Mara's heart pounded. "Awaken what?" she asked, but the answer came not in words. The light from the ring burst upward, flooding the room. For a brief moment, she saw everything. Faces, places, histories overlapping, as if all of time existed in one heartbeat. Then silence. The light dimmed. The observatory was still. Daniel stood there, breathing heavily, the symbols gone. Mara rushed to him. "What happened?" she whispered. He looked at her, eyes filled with something she couldn't name. "The truth," he said quietly. "It was never hidden. We just stopped listening." Outside, the sky cleared completely. The hum faded. News stations would later report that the global disturbances ended abruptly at sunrise. But as Mara and Daniel stepped out into the morning light, they noticed one last thing. Carved into the observatory door was a fresh mark, glowing faintly. It read, "Asterisk, the third silence is yet to come." Asterisk. The morning air outside the observatory felt cleaner, calmer, as if the earth itself had taken a long breath. The birds had returned. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the strange heaviness that had hung over everything was gone. Daniel and Mara stood quietly for a while, letting the silence settle between them. It wasn't the kind of silence that frightened. It was peaceful, almost sacred. Daniel looked down at the faint symbol carved into the door, its glow fading with the rising sun. "The third silence," he murmured. "Do you think it means there's more coming?" Mara shrugged softly, still watching the horizon. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it means we're supposed to learn from what already happened." She smiled faintly. "Your grandfather wanted to wake people up, Daniel. Maybe that was the real prophecy, not an ending, but an awakening." They walked down the path leading away from the observatory. Every step felt lighter, as if some invisible weight had lifted. The news that day spoke of the strange global phenomena fading as quickly as they had appeared. Scientists struggled to explain it, while others whispered about divine signs, ancient codes, and end-times mysteries. But Daniel and Mara knew the truth wasn't something that could fit neatly into a headline. It was something deeper, a reminder that the end times weren't just about destruction, but about rediscovery, about paying attention to the quiet messages the world keeps sending. Later that week, Daniel published his story, not as an expose, but as a reflection. He wrote about faith, history, and how the secrets hidden in plain sight were often the ones meant to guide us back to understanding. Mara returned to teaching, though her lessons now carried a softer tone. She spoke of connection, of how prophecy wasn't only about the future, but also about how we live now. As night fell, Daniel stood outside his apartment, looking up at the stars. They seemed to shine a little brighter there, patterns familiar but endlessly mysterious. He smiled, thinking of his grandfather's words, "Truth is never lost, only waiting to be remembered." Somewhere, in that quiet moment, the world felt at peace again, not because the end had come, but because, for the first time in a long while, someone had truly listened.